Okay, hello, and welcome to CCSD FYI series. This is Mental Health 101, and this is a very highly requested program that aims to just kind of outline mental health at the college level, especially given what we're going through today, still in a pandemic. There's been so many changes with how we're operating as a university and some minor changes even with how we're operating in terms of counseling. And so I hope this can be helpful today. And notice that everything will be recorded this semester on the FYI series programs. If you're able to visit WebEx, you can see all of the lineup that we will be having. And I will drop actually in comments the link to those programs so that you can check them out. You can share them with friends. If you give me one moment, I can actually do that at this time. Okay. Okay, awesome. So again, through webex.com, ECU's on stage, you can research CCSD FYI series. This is a public event, so you'll be able to access all the recordings, okay? So we'll jump right in. I will share my screen here. Okay, so again, this is Mental Health 101 and considerations for managing crisis as well. Now, what is a crisis? Crisis can be anything that really comes up unexpected, causes you to experience a level of distress and change, and you're really not sure how to approach or handle those emotional heights or feelings. And so I definitely want to add that in, and we'll be defining crisis a little bit more, because in today's time, crisis has happened. There's a lot of uncertainties, there's a lot of changes, and so we want to be in full recognition, not only of how we can help ourselves, but how we can help others. So first, if we think about what are some words used to describe people with mental illness, right? And a lot of times when I do this presentation, we'll hear different words such as depression, crazy, right? Anxiety disorder, stress, psychological, cope, sensory, social. And the reality is that we still have a major stigma to dispel when it comes to mental health. And we want to be very clear and aware of what our language is when we think of mental health and mental illness. So the first thing I would think about is ruling out words such as crazy or insane or abnormal, because everyone is susceptible to experiencing some mental health challenges. And we want to really work towards normalizing that, not just within ourselves, but with others, those around us. And we want to create a more compassionate community that allows people to feel comfortable sharing the various things that they're going through and dealing with. Okay. Give me 1 second here. Some technical difficulties. Let's stop our share and we'll try this. Here we go. Okay, awesome. So moving on, I always love quotes and thinking about what they mean and how we can apply them to our lives. And so it says, when someone's going through a storm, your silent presence is more powerful than a million empty words. So when someone is going through a storm, your silent presence is more powerful than a million empty words. So mental health 101, I think, lies in the fact that you do not have to be an expert to serve as a support for yourself or for others. And so I want to encourage you to take off the pressure of needing to know exactly what to do in a situation where you run into someone dealing with a mental health concern, or you are going through a mental health concern, because it's a very tough situation with a lot of factors outside of your control. So sometimes you don't have to say a thing, and you don't need to be an expert, something that is very important to remember. Let's just start by considering what you need to be present for yourself, in the moment for yourself, and be present with others. So what we're going to cover today is mental health and really defining what that is. I know that's something that we say a lot. So we're going to really get to the definition of what mental health is comprised of, and then presenting concerns. So these are the things that have really showed up across college campuses across the nation, and ECU is no exception to that. We'll move down to signs and symptoms of these various presenting concerns and mental health concerns in general. We'll get back to that crisis that we were talking about. And then intervention and management. So what we can do and how we can manage mental illness or mental health concerns as well. So first, starting with mental health, this diagram of the 4 elements of empathy. So we know that empathy is different from sympathy, and it's not about feeling sorry for someone, but more so about allowing ourselves to be in deeper understanding or empathy so that we can meet ourselves and others where we are when it comes to mental health concerns. So first is seeing their world. You know, it's the idea of, can we imagine what an experience may be like for someone before we immediately go to judgment or fear. And then, of course, with no judgment, being able to appreciate others as human beings and ourselves as human beings. You know, we have encountered and are still in a pandemic, and it is something no one that I know or anyone in our lifetime has ever experienced before. And so we are prone to responding as humans will respond to uncertainty. And we want to be open to and accepting of that. And then we have understanding feelings, right? So it's really important to know and get in tune with your emotions and feelings so that you can be in a position to better manage them. A lot of times we may encounter feelings and emotions that feel uncomfortable, and our first inclination is to get away from them. When our feelings are a part of who we are and they're not there to harm us, but more so for us to understand. And then lastly, communicate that understanding. So again, we at the Counseling Center serve as a major resource for these mental health concerns and uncomfortable thoughts, feelings, and emotions. And we want to encourage everyone to allow themselves to get to a vulnerable place to communicate, hey, I'm trying to understand what I'm experiencing more, and communicate to others, I understand what you might be going through. So these are the 4 elements of empathy that are important when considering mental illness. And then let's just define mental health. So mental health includes our emotional, psychological, and social well-being. So it includes really every important aspect of our lives, how we feel, how we think, how we act, right? So our behavior. The other thing is how we handle stress. So I always ask students when I am speaking on mental health one-on-one is think about the last time you encountered a major mental health concern, right? So a very stressful event, the last thing that happened, right? Allow you to put that in your mind. And then I would ask you to think about how you responded to that stressful event. And that's going to give you a lot of information about where you fall in terms of mental health, how you're managing it, and your overall mental well-being. How have you responded to the things that have happened in your life? And then mental health comprises of how we relate to others, right? Our social relationships. And again, this is a very difficult time because a lot of us have found ourselves isolated, right? You may even be in quarantine, and it's for many of us, the first time ever or in a long time that we've had to be with ourselves, right? So we've had to innovate new ways to connect to other people, how to maintain relationships, and what that means in terms of our psychological and social well-being as well. Decision making. So making choices and how we process making choices, what goes into motivating our choices is a major facet of mental health as well. And again, another quote, it's amazing to think how much time we spend looking at our physical health and how little time we spend looking after the health of the mind. So, you know, you cannot have one without the other. There is certainly a mind-body connection that goes on in all of us. And so just as easily as you may go to the doctor for a headache or a sore throat, you may need to consider going to seek a professional help if you're dealing with some emotional or mental difficulties. And then there's a little cartoon that says, everyone else seems to be so happy and normal. I wish I wasn't the only person with mental health issues. And notice all 3 of these people are saying that. And so it's amazing what we see in the counseling center where students say they feel like they're the only one, when in reality, no one is exempt from mental health concerns or mental health challenges. All right, so a little bit of the statistics here. Approximately 1 in 5 adults in the US, 43.8 million or 18.5%, experiences a mental illness in a given year. And I want to pause and really highlight the fact that mental illness is a continuum. So it can be something as minor as, feeling like it's very difficult to make everyday decisions, to more serious concerns and diagnoses that may be found in our statistical manual may require medication. And so just because you aren't all the way at the end of the spectrum, what we tend to see in the news or on TV, doesn't mean that there is no concern. So we want to be aware of that as well. And then approximately 1 in 25 adults in the US, that's 9.8 million, experiences a serious mental illness in a given year that substantially interferes with or limits one or more major life activities. Okay, so again, when we think about mental health and mental health illness or concern, one of the ways to assess that is, has this had a major impact on different areas of my life? Right? Am I able to maintain my academic life? Am I able to maintain a job or relationships? Have I had any legal issues because of how I feel? And if the answer is yes to or no to either any of those questions, that may be something to look into as well. And then approximately 1 in 5 youth age 13 to 18 experiences a severe mental health disorder. So again, that spectrum at some point during their life. So for children age 8 to 15, the estimate is 13%, right? And that's a really big number. And all of this is according to the National Alliance on Mental Health. But one thing to think about is most mental health concerns, illnesses, or disorders are found between the ages of 18 to 22, right? 18 to 25. And so when you think about being here at ECU and in college, this is the time to be in great awareness and foster a deeper understanding of how mental health, emotions, and feelings play a role in your life. So a little bit more statistics here. 16 million adults, that's 6.9% in the US, has had at least one major depressive episode in the past year. Okay, 18.1 adults in the US experience an anxiety disorder. So we're talking about depression and anxiety. This includes post-traumatic stress disorder, or you may have heard it as PTSD, obsessive compulsive disorder, which is OCD, and other specific phobias, right? Fears that really have a major impact on daily life. And then again, among 20.2 million adults in the US who experience a substance use disorder, so this is using any type of substances, alcohol, or other drugs, had a co-occurring mental illness. So what this means is, in addition to maybe experiencing anxiety or depression, maybe in order to cope, they start using substances, and that substance use turns into an addiction or a disorder. So now you have what's called a co-occurring mental illness, which is I have two mental illnesses going on at the same time, because substance use disorder is classified as a mental illness, and it is a diagnosis that we can see. And substance use is also something that we address in the counseling center with our awesome alcohol and other drug counselors. And we also have a collegiate recovery community, which is a community run by John Michael Harris, in which students who may have found themselves dealing with this substance use disorder and now they're in recovery can have a community to go to. Okay. So again, this is the National Alliance on Mental Health. So let's look at presenting concerns, anxiety and depression. These are the two concerns that we see the most in the counseling center, and on a national level, these are the two disorders or illnesses that show up the most in college students. And so I think it's important to highlight both of these with the full recognition that you may be experiencing some other level of illness or disorder or just challenge. So first, anxiety, which really leads the pack. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the US. It affects 40 million adults, right? So think about that. This is the most common mental illness in the US. And anxiety disorders are one of the most common mental health problems on college campuses. So again, there's a lot to be worried about, to the point where it begins to interfere with your functioning, such as academic life, social life. And one thing to keep in mind is that anxiety disorders are highly treatable. And so again, the counseling center is able to serve and address this presenting concern. The next one is depression, right? So nearly 1/2 of those diagnosed with depression are also diagnosed with an anxiety disorder. So they kind of go hand in hand. And again, we'll define depression and anxiety a little bit in a second, but about 1/3 of college students have experienced depression within the past year. And if you really look at the statistics, 80% of college students have said at least at one point in their college career have they felt overwhelmed. So that's something to think about when we consider normalizing this. And major depression, again, is also highly treatable, which is a good thing. It's something that we are able to address in the counseling center. Okay. So moving on, when you think about presenting concerns, how do we assess for that, right? Specifically, anxiety and depression. One of the things that we can think about is how we're thinking and processing information. So earlier we talked about thinking being a part of our mental health. So if you notice that maybe it begins to be difficult to concentrate in class, maybe you're having poor judgment on decisions, you're constantly worrying to the point where maybe it interferes with physically sleep or eating. You have racing thoughts that really maybe snowball out of control. So in other words, one thought leads to the next and leads to the next thought. And then only seeing the negative is a piece of some of those thinking that may indicate that there is a concern there as it relates to anxiety and depression. And then emotionally, just feeling really irritable, overwhelmed, and agitated, right? I think if you can recognize that a sense of loneliness and isolation is a presenting concern of anxiety and depression, and we are currently in a situation, this pandemic, COVID-19, where we have increased instances of having to be alone and having to be isolated. So we're particularly susceptible at this point in time. And then just overall unhappiness more days than not. So moving on down to action, so behavior, and then physically, so what's going on with our body. Remember, we talked about that mind-body connection. Feeling aches and pains, frequent colds, stomach issues, sexual intimacy issues, chest pain, rapid heartbeat, even maybe feeling nauseous or dizzy and you're really not sure where that came from. This is an indication that it could potentially be anxiety or depression. I think it's amazing how the body is able to tell us if something's wrong or if something's going on. And so I always encourage you to look at your body first. And sometimes that will tell you more than your mind will. And then, of course, behaviorally, noticing when things change from your typical routine. So maybe your appetite increases or decreases, you're sleeping too much or too little, beginning to intentionally isolate yourself from others while procrastinating or neglecting your responsibilities altogether. You know, we talked earlier about substance use. So if you feel like maybe using alcohol, cigarettes, or drugs, and you know, you start thinking, okay, this is the only way, the only thing that relaxes me, it's the only thing that allows me to escape this feeling. That's also something to think about. So another thing is nervous habits. So intense, maybe nail biting or pacing at a higher rate than maybe normal. That would be something to think about as well. Okay, moving right along. So one of the things in anxiety disorders are panic disorders. So a panic disorder is an anxiety disorder characterized by recurrent unexpected panic attacks. So these panic attacks are things that maybe come up out of the blue, and they're sudden feelings of intense fear or anxiety that strike without warning. The fear and terror that a person experiences during a panic attack are not in proportion to the true situation. So they may not match what's really going on, and it may be completely unrelated to what's happening around you. But this is one that comes with a lot of physical symptoms as well. Heart palpitations or accelerated heart rate, sweating and trembling, sensations with shortness of breath. Sometimes it even feels like maybe your chest is caving in or you're going to choke, or abdominal distress such as nausea, feeling dizzy. Many people may note getting chills, beginning to feel cold or numb, and then derealization. So feelings of unreality, almost as if you're outside of your body, right? As if you're losing control. These are some of the things to look for in terms of anxiety when it gets to be panic, okay? And then you also have PTSD, which we hear about a lot. And I think it's really important to recognize that no one is exempt from trauma or struggle, right? And it's very interesting how our society can give us information about something that may not be completely accurate. So for example, PTSD is one of those disorders that people automatically attribute to being in the military. But in fact, the number one cause of PTSD is actually a physical assault, sexual trauma, sexual assault, maybe even the sudden death of a loved one, car accidents, illness, injury, severe suffering, or natural disasters, just to name a few, right? So think about that. You could be walking across campus, or you have maybe have experienced some sort of physical attack. Something startles you to the point where it leads to an experience of trauma, something that you really can't get away from or seem to get past. And this can also cause PTSD. So again, we want to normalize these experiences, especially those things such as natural disasters or car accidents that we can't control, and understand that even though I may not feel something immediately, it can still be having a major impact on my mental health. And that can start this cycle where we begin to feel anxiety. Maybe we do have a panic attack, or maybe we don't, but then we just fear having more anxiety, or we fear having another panic attack, which again increases our anxiety. And then we have another attack and more fear, and it turns into this cycle. And so you do have the power to interrupt that cycle by utilizing your resources and getting help, and knowing that this can occur repeatedly until we are able to intentionally interrupt it. Okay. So again, empathy, right? Let's put ourselves in others' shoes and try to empathize with them with regards to what they could possibly be going through, or what we could even be going through. And then that's very different from sympathy, which is where we're only able to understand from our own perspective, right? We want to be open to understanding everyone around us. Okay. I'm actually going to skip here. This is just a little bit of information about mental health and African Americans. Adult Black African Americans are 20% more likely to report serious psychological distress than white adults. And so this is according to the Office of Minority Health. You're being a minority, a person of color, BIPOC, Indigenous, this may have a bigger impact on your likeliness to seek out help, or to feel like you are susceptible to mental illness as well. Adult Black African Americans living below poverty are 3 times more likely to report serious psychological distress than those living above poverty. And white adults living in poverty also have a higher percentage of reporting or seeking help for their psychological distress. Adult Black or African Americans are more likely to have feelings of sadness, hopelessness, and worthlessness than white adults, especially with regards to the political climate or nature of the culture at that time. And then Black and African Americans are of all ages are more likely to be victims of serious violent crimes than are non-Hispanic whites, making them more likely to meet the diagnostic criteria for PTSD. So again, mental illness does not discriminate by race, age, color, but it is something for us to take into account. And especially when we talk about that empathy, how can we understand the experiences of others and how that may have an even different impact on their mental health? Okay. So I mentioned earlier dual diagnosis, and what a dual diagnosis is when you have a mental illness at play and maybe substance use. I know that says abuse, but the proper term is use. And when we're dealing with both of those things, it creates what's called a dual diagnosis. And this is really important to think about, because especially in college age, where many students are trying alcohol and drugs for the first time, it doesn't really matter what comes first. You know, there is a byproduct of depression, anxiety, and other mental disorders that can come from using substances, and vice versa. Mental illness can cause us to cope or try to heal through substances. And so we want to be careful and be aware of mental illness, if nothing more, but for the fact that it can stem and lead way to other challenges and struggles in our lives. Okay. So on the downslope, let's get to crisis. What is a crisis? Because we hear this a lot, and the counseling center has been said to have crisis hours. But crisis is a state of mind in which someone is unable to cope and adjust to the recurrent stresses of everyday living in a functional and safe way. Okay, so someone's unable to cope and adjust to the recurrent stresses of every day. So again, it almost feels like one is losing control. And it's a relatively sudden situation, or it can be, in which there feels like there's an imminent risk of harm to self and others, and one's judgment is impaired. So it feels like, I'm not sure I can trust my own decisions, or someone maybe expresses that they don't know what to do. And this can be considered a crisis. So when we think about crisis, we can intervene with that. And we can use the ALGE here acronym, where it says A, first, assess for risk for suicide or harm, right? Unfortunately, suicide has been the second leading cause of death among college students. And so we have to be aware and open to asking, hey, have you ever felt like you wanted to end your life? And that's a really important place to start with crisis intervention. And then listening non-judgmentally. So again, that empathy, allow someone to speak while you operate and hold space for that person. While they're in a crisis, it can feel very isolating. And so allowing someone to know that they do have support, they do have someone there who's listening, is very important. And of course, giving reassurance and information. Hey, have you heard of the counseling center? They have these resources. Have you ever been to wellness, or have you ever been to the student center where they have this wellness hub? Allow yourself to be aware of what the resources are on campus and in your community, so that you can help provide that to yourself and others. And the last two are encouragement. So encouraging appropriate professional help. So again, we have many outlets on campus. The counseling center is one of them. There's also the PASS clinic, psychological assessments, the McClammy lab, Navigate. All of these areas on campus provide counseling. And then the Dean of Students office is also an outlet that doesn't necessarily provide counseling, but can be very helpful. And then encourage self-help and other support strategies. So it may be an opportunity to just deep breathe with someone and recognize how that can have a large impact, sitting with them and just being in a place of being the listener. We want to be aware to not see people as their illness. And so it's important to use person-centered language by seeing past their symptoms. Remember, what you see are symptoms. Who you know is bigger than that, right? So mental health disorders are not adjectives, right? So on the right side, you see here, my OCD is coming out again, or you look so anorexic, or, oh yeah, yesterday I was feeling really depressed. We want to be very careful about the language that we use, because negative language reinforces discrimination and isolation. Other thing we want to do is promote empowerment and strength, understand what we know about a person and how we can use that to re-empower them. Hey, I know that it's really hard to sit here and tell me what you're going through. But I commend you for being able to do that. And that can go a long way for someone feeling like they can reach out for help. Starting a conversation with someone regarding mental health. 101, we want to avoid why questions, right? So we want to avoid getting people into a situation where they're having to explain themselves again, especially if you're not a professional. That's not something that you may be able to support. And so steer away from why questions, using more open-ended questions. And examples of this can be, what's your name? Hey, things seem difficult right now. Tell me about your day. What has helped you in the past? Have you ever experienced this before? Do you have family in the area? What's your support system look like? And just getting a gauge of someone's day, how are classes coming along? So this small talk can actually allow someone to really have safe contact with their emotions before they can get to the proper resources. And again, we don't like to say the word, but it's a very real thing, is suicide. And I know I mentioned earlier, second leading cause of death, and that has moved up, but it has steadily been in the top 5. So according to the National Alliance of Mental Health, as early as 2017, suicide has been the 3rd leading cause of death among college campuses. And that number, we believe, is growing. 6% of undergraduate and 4% of graduate students in the four-year colleges have seriously considered attempting suicide in the past year. So nearly half of that group didn't tell anyone. Okay, so we really want to take this seriously and recognize that it's something many people may be experiencing silently to themselves. So we can ask the question, are you having thoughts of ending your life? And I encourage students sometimes, especially those who maybe are even in leadership positions, RAs, student government, or just if you have a group of friends, practice asking yourself that in the mirror. You know, it feels uncomfortable, it almost feels intrusive, but it can really be helpful. And many times people may want someone to ask them that question. So, and we can assess by using the SLAP method. So first, like, oh, okay, if someone says yes, well, how specific is your plan? 2, then how lethal is the proposed method? So in other words, you know, according to that plan, is this someone who has to go and travel a long way to carry out their plan? Or do they have to just go back to their room where they may have pills or a gun, which then heightens the concern and the need to maybe reach out for immediate help? A, how available is the proposed method? So again, really considering based on someone's answers, is this someone that someone would be able to do immediately? And then what's the proximity of the helping resources? So we know now that we are remote and some people may not have access to getting to a crisis intervention or the hospital. And so we want to recognize how closely can we get someone to a helping resource? Many places are offering telehealth and remote services. The counseling center is one of those areas we're offering remote services at this time. And so again, it's important to equip yourself with all of the resources, okay? And of course, that one of those top resources are the Center for Counseling and Student Development. So we're located in Umstead and we are available via phone, 8 to 5. And we also have after hours and daytime crisis intervention. After 5 o'clock, if you called our center, you would be prompted to press 2 and you'd be automatically connected to an on-call counselor. And at the current moment, our social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, we encourage you to follow us there because we have information about the programs that we're running, helpful statistics and things maybe that would also go into your resource toolbox. As of now, we're continuing to provide counseling via teletherapy, so phone or video. And again, if you need urgent support or are interested in scheduling an appointment, please call our office, 252-328-6661. Other resources are ECU Cares. So let's say you are concerned about a student and you're not sure how to go about it. Maybe they have expressed not wanting to go to counseling. ECU Cares is a service through the Dean of Students Office where you can make an anonymous report about a student of concern, and they will be able to follow up with that student. ECU is there. So medication management, if you're experiencing a mental illness or concern, medication may be a part of that treatment. And so we do offer that at Student Health Services. Disability support services, and then we have the Real Crisis Center and mobile crisis unit in the community as well. So I'll pause here, take a breath for questions. I know that was a lot of information. Oh, stop sharing my screen. Okay, great. I know that was a lot of information and it can seem very, very overwhelming, but one of the things to consider is visiting our website that I'll drop here, www.ecu.edu/counseling center. And we have a world of resources, everything from apps about how to manage, how to deal, mindfulness. We have ongoing support groups, process groups, different theme groups that may be beneficial to you. I would consider looking up, and just overall resources related to COVID-19, isolation and quarantine that you may be experiencing at this time, okay? So again, we are here to support you and recognize that you do not have to be an expert to help yourself or to help others. And we wish you the best with all the changes that we've encountered over the last year, and encourage you to seek all the resources necessary so that you can continue to thrive in this ever-changing environment. So again, my name is Maya Pittman, and I am a counselor in the Counseling Center and Outreach Coordinator. Check out more of our programs that will be taking place all throughout the semester, presentation style. They'll all be recorded for your access. And we wish you the best. Take care.